Okay, thank you for attending our program. But first, a word from our sponsor, JFCS. We offer a range of senior programming for the older adults in our community. Secure at Home is one of our senior service programs designed to help older adults age safely, comfortably, and independently in their own homes. Our geriatric care managers provide an umbrella of services to promote healthy aging and aging in place. Seniors find healing through support groups to work through age-related challenges. Tailored social and economic educational programs, as well as care management and senior nutrition programs, ensure that the needs of our older adults can be met. We are proud to continue offering our full services in line with health and safety guidelines during this challenging time. Learn more about all programs, including webinars and resources, at www.jfcsonline.org. And before I welcome our speaker, Evelyn Grossman, please know that questions can be submitted in the chat at any time, and we are planning to address them at the end of the program. About Evie. Evelyn Joseph Grossman was raised in Trenton, New Jersey by parents who wanted to embrace American culture, yet couldn't separate themselves from their German past and German accents. She earned a bachelor's degree from Douglas College at Rutgers University and a master's degree from Fordham University. In her professional life, she worked as a financial analyst in the field of commercial debt obligations. In retirement, she has focused on writing her parents' story, honoring the rescuers as righteous among the nations, doing volunteer work in social service programs in Trenton, going on bike rides with her husband, Lenny, and taking trips to California to visit her grandkids. May I introduce my dear friend, Evie Grossman.
Andrea, thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
For that lovely introduction. And thank you, JFCS, for sponsoring this program and allowing me to share my book and the story of my parents. So thank you so much, and all of you, for coming and for listening. So I'm, let's see, going to start with, okay, let's go back to the beginning. Okay. Okay, just Andrea, can you see this screen there?
Yep, we're good.
Okay.
Yep.
You're good. All right, this is the cover of the book called Hidden in Berlin, a Holocaust Memoir. On the cover, you'll see my parents. This is a picture of their wedding day, on their wedding day. It was in March 1947, just 2 years after the end of the war, not even 2 years. The picture says a lot. My mother is very fashionably dressed with a wide brimmed hat and a fur coat. And my father looks rather somber, but they both look rather happy. And it was a good day. It was a wonderful day. So I'm going to, the book, whoops, went too fast. The book starts out as the story of two separate families. My father's family, the Joseph family, and my mother's family, the Jacoby family. My mother and father knew one another before they went into hiding, but it was after the war that they got married. The Joseph family, you can see here on the beach, the Baltic Sea actually, and I'm assuming it's around 1926. This picture really breaks my heart. They look so happy. They have no idea what the future will hold. My father is sitting in the background. His older brother, my Uncle Gerhard, is in the front, and my grandparents are on either side. It is amazing how formal my grandfather looks, and he's as if he's about to go to work. My grandmother looks a bit more casual, wearing a dress. And as I've said, she later on comes to live with us. I have never seen her wear anything but a dress, never slacks. But the picture, as I said, is beautiful, and it has no idea of what's to come. In 1933, when Hitler assumes power, everything changes, and it changes very rapidly. My father, who was then at the university, cannot remain. My uncle, who has finished, can stay longer, but when he also cannot stay, both boys go to Switzerland for a brief time to study. While there, they get a telegram that their father, my grandfather, has had a heart attack and they should come home. My father comes back and starts to work with his dad at his business, which was importing canned goods, tuna, sardines, mackerel from different places in Europe and selling them in retailers in Berlin. It was in a market hall, which is across from Alexanderplatz. My uncle is able to get a visa and comes to America, and he gets in 1938. In November 1938 is Kristallnacht, a night of the broken glass. My father and my uncle, my father rather, and my grandfather are arrested and put into prison. My grandmother frantically sends a telegram to her older son, to Gerhard in America, asking for help. He sends money, they do get released. But things rapidly deteriorate after that. My grandfather is forced to sell his business and forced to work as a janitor. And my father begins construction work. I want to show you this document. It's called a Polizeiliche Erlaubnis, a police permission slip. And this is something my father carried with him every day, and I'll explain why. You can see that it's a well-worn document. The edges are pretty tattered and worn there. And I'm going to focus on two parts of the document. This is the top of it. On the top, you can see what the date is, says 28/4/42. The European way first had the day, the month, and then the year. So this was dated April 28th, 1942. Underneath where the Polizei Erlaubnis, it says Dame Juden, Ernst Israel Joseph. My father's name was Ernst Joseph. It was Israel, Israel was not part of his name. It was added by the Nazis. All Jews were given the name Israel as well as their formal name, as women were given Sarah. He is also identified clearly as Dame Juden, that the Jew. And then it goes on as Arbeiter, he was a worker. The next line says he was born on July 17th, 1915, which is correct. He lived on Kaiser Wilhelmstrasse 25, also correct, but what's interesting, he lived there. They originally lived on Linienstrasse. Rules did not allow people to live where they originally lived, but landlords could evict Jewish tenants, and they had to move to certain Jewish neighborhoods, Jewish houses, and that's when they moved from Linienstrasse to Kaiser Wilhelmstrasse. On the bottom of the document, you can also see that he could go from his Wohnung, where he lived, to Berlin Garten, to an area outside the northern part of Berlin, which was where Siemens was. Because at that time, my father was doing forced labor, Zwangsarbeit, in Siemens. He was allowed to ride the S-Bahn. You can see that there also, and that's all he was allowed to do. And very interesting, on the bottom, you can clearly see, I think you can clearly see the Nazi icon, the symbol of an eagle on top of a swastika. So this, in fact, was an official document to give him permission to ride the trains, to ride the train to work. So we see this document was in 42. But in 1941, the deportations had started from Berlin. October, actually, the Nazis started deporting Jews from Berlin. Jews can no longer leave Germany. When my uncle had gone to America, he sent affidavits to try to get his parents and his brother out. The line of the waiting list was so long that they never succeeded in getting out. My father realized there was no way they were going to escape, and soon enough they would also be deported. So he began looking very diligently for a hiding place, which was especially hard. He had to find a place not just for himself, but for three people: his mother, his father, and himself. He had contacts working in the food market, and a friend put him in touch with this couple. Here you could see Lainey and Paul Pisarius. They are middle-class working people in Germany, not Jewish, Aryans, good people, who agreed to take in three Jews into their house, into their apartment. They lived in a small apartment in the center of Berlin, and they had a small room, roughly 10 by 10. And in that room, they allowed my father and his parents to stay. Now, at that time, no one, they go into hiding the end of January 1943. And of course, no one knows how long the war is going to last. They're just hoping it will end soon, but obviously it doesn't. While in hiding, my father has to leave frequently. Food, he needs to go out on the street. He needs to go and bring back food for himself and his parents. And that is always a very, very risky endeavor to go out and get the food. I'm going to move now to my mother's family. Her was the Jacobi family. And here you see her father and her brother, two pictures of her brother. Bruno Jacobi there, her father served in the Great War in World War I. And maybe you can see on his lapel, there's a little flag, or he earned the Iron Cross First Class, of which he was extremely proud. And to him, that made him as German as any of his neighbors. And he never believed that anything bad would happen to him or his families. He felt his patriotism, his service would protect his family. For a while it did, but not just for a while. The center picture, the next two pictures are my mother's brother, Hans Martin. The middle picture is his first day of school. It is typical for German children to be given a Schultüte, a big cone filled with candy to begin their school education, to begin the education with sweetness. So the way you see him there is very typical of how German children began school. And the next picture there is Hans Martin, the last picture we have of him. And I think he's about 20 or 21. Here is a picture of my mother and my mother with her brother, and a card I'll talk about in a second. My mother loved dancing and dreamed of becoming a ballerina. So in that first picture, I think she's around 10. She is dancing, and that is something she has loved. She continues to love dancing. The middle picture is my mother with her brother. Her brother was her best friend, her buddy, her constant companion, whether it was biking or ice skating or whatever. They were inseparable. The last frame there is an ID card. It is I believe it's from Siemens. You'll see on there, the Nationalität is DR, Deutsches Republik. Underneath it said Zunahme, which is last name, Jacobi. Vorname, first name, says Elizabeth Sarah. Again, you'll see the name Sarah there. That wasn't her name. It was added by the Nazis. Underneath it is her birth date, geboren am July 21st, 1923, and she is a worker. Where she lived was in the section of Germany, of Berlin, called Halensee, Hectorstrasse, number 19. That is where she grew up. As a child, she went to school, to the Bismarck Lyceum, which was a girls' school, and there she meets a friend, Eva Kassira. Eva Kassira becomes extremely important to Mom later on. As a matter of fact, she's the person who rescues her, but that is how Mom who meets her initially. Mom can stay in school a bit longer than other children because initially they give extra privileges to children of the war veterans, but after a year that ends. She goes to a Jewish school for a year, and again, that ends. The major part of Mom's Jewish education comes from this man, Rabbi Joachim Prinz. Rabbi Prinz was a rabbi in Berlin who had an extremely strong influence on Mom and her brother. Through Rabbi Prinz, Mom learned prayers, she learned songs, she learned an appreciation for Judaism, which I'm sad to say did not come from her home. Her parents were assimilated Jews who believed that Christmas was a German holiday. But through Rabbi Prinz, Mom learned much about Judaism. But what Rabbi Prinz did, besides teach Judaism, he invited the kids to come to his home on Shabbat to eat to play, to read, to play ball, to study Torah. He had an incredibly strong influence. He was a gifted orator, and he spoke to his congregation about the threat of Hitler. And he's warned his very cosmopolitan congregation of Berlin Jews to not to take Hitler seriously. They wanted to dismiss it as a passing thing. He warned them not to do that. The Nazis started monitoring his speeches, and he left in 1937 because he was being harassed by the Nazis. When he came to America, he began a whole new chapter in his life and became the rabbi in the congregation in Newark and became very active in the civil rights movement. Rabbi Prince marched with Martin Luther King in 1963 on the March on Washington. And he gave an amazing speech, a speech that talked about that one must speak up, and that the biggest danger is silence, and that if you see prejudice, if you see problems, you must speak up. The speech was wonderful, but it's a speech that no one remembers, because immediately after he sat down, Martin Luther King stood up and gave the I Have a Dream speech. Okay. I wanted to move on to this slide here. This is the slide. Okay, this was to talk to you about how my parents met. As I mentioned, the Rabbi Prince left, and he left a hole in the hearts of many of the Jews. Whoops, that was too fast. Sorry about that. The Jews in Berlin and all over are very resilient. So when they lose their jobs, which they did in civil service occupations, whether they were in offices or actually as musicians for state organized symphonies, they banded together and formed the Jüdische Kulturbund. I bring this to your attention because this is where my parents met. The Jüdische Kulturbund was made up of outstanding musicians. These are the ones who performed in all the German opera symphonies and opera houses. But when they were forced out of their jobs, they came together and gave performances for just Jewish audiences. My father loved classical music and came to the concerts often. My mother came one night with her brother, and my father noticed this pretty girl with wavy brown hair, and that is how they met. I put this book on, oops, sorry about that. Going backwards, there it is. This is a book written by Martin Goldsmith called The Inextinguishable Symphony. He writes about his parents who were musicians in this orchestra, and I just found it fascinating. There were many, not just in Berlin, but throughout Germany. There were the Jüdische Kulturbund. His parents performed, and they came to America. While this is not my parents' story, I found his book and the story of this organization fascinating. One more quick thing. It was, to some might find it surprising that the Nazis allowed this organization to exist. In fact, it served a dual purpose. It served as a great propaganda vehicle. The Nazis could point to it and say, hey, the Jews are being well treated. Look, they have their own symphony. It also took care that it was financed to go to these performances. The Jews in Germany would pay tickets to go to the performances. So it took care of some problems of finances for many Jews, but mostly it was a propaganda tool. That existed until 1941, when the deportation started. The Kulturbund was put out, could no longer exist. As I said before, the deportations began in 1941 in October. At that time, my mother and her brother were working in Siemens, not the same place where my father was. There were many Siemens throughout Berlin. When a knock on the door came, that came actually in September 1942. The knock on the door came, the Gestapo came and took my mother's parents, my grandparents, took them out and deported them. When my mother and her brother returned home, they find the doors sealed, the tape on the door, with instructions to go to Grosse Hamburger Strasse, which was the deportation center. Mom and her brother had talked about this in advance, and they did not go. They decided they would go in hiding. They had a former nanny, Clara Pashka. They go to her house, and she takes them in and she protects them. However, in a short time, her house gets bombed and they have nowhere to go. They're there walking on the streets. And actually in February of 1943, Mom's brother, Hans Martin, is deported. Mom has no idea what happens to him. It's just that she never sees him again. While walking on the street, Mom literally and by accident comes in contact with Eva Kassira. Eva Kassira is the young woman who's in the center of this slide. Eva looks at Mom and says to her, "Do you have a place to sleep?" And my mother shakes her head. And Eva says, "Come to my house tonight. Perhaps my mother can help you." Her mother, Hanna Zaczek, and Eva live in this mansion, and that is the inappropriate word. They live in Grunewald, which is the beautiful neighborhood of Berlin, and they live in this beautiful house. Mrs. Zaczek needs help with cleaning. She takes my mother in as a maid. Eva finds false papers. They give Mom a new name, a new identity, Lisa Lotte Lehmann. The biggest problem there is that Mrs. Zaczek entertains many Nazis. People are coming in and out of that house constantly. And what Mom basically has to do is stay out of sight or try to say as little as possible to all these people who come in. Also, they do not want anyone to know that she has no home, that she really has no place to live. So when there are people staying overnight, which happened often, Mom says, "Guten Abend," she says good night, walks out of this beautiful house, walks outside into an underground bunker and stays there for hours and hours until she looks up the window. When it's safe to come inside, the window's open and she knows she can safely return back into her house. While this time, Mom is living in this house from about February 1943 until the war ends. The bombing in Berlin is horrendous. By the time the war is over, about 80% of the city is destroyed. Tens of thousands of people have lost their homes. People are sleeping wherever. Thousands of people have died and just living they've been bombed out, they've been killed. In February of 1945, my grandfather, my father's father, dies of a heart attack. He's had medical problems. And of course, when you're living in hiding, there is no way to get medical attention. You cannot go to a doctor. You cannot go to a hospital. You can do nothing. No one can know that you are alive. So there is no way to get help. My grandfather dies while in hiding. And then there is this problem. What do you do? What do you do with someone who has died when you're living in a small room? And of course, this body cannot remain there. So in the middle of the night, my father, along with Paul Pisarius, do what they have to do. They take the body on a cart and they walk to the River Spree, which is a few blocks away. And my father gently places the body into the water. This event haunts my father for the rest of his life. It is a pain that he can never get over. It is a shame and a guilt that haunts him forever. But there is no alternative. Fortunately, the war ends in May 1945. And when the war ends, 55,000 Jews in Berlin have been deported. And after the war, about 1,400 people emerged from hiding who were living illegal the way my parents were. What is amazing to me that 1,400 people survived in hiding in different ways, but 3 of these people are my grandmother, my father, and my mother, which I think is amazing. The period after the war is a time of waiting, basically. My grandmother leaves to get to America. She leaves in 1947. HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, helps arrange the transportation for her to come to America to join her older son, Gerhard, who is now living in Trenton. He's married a Trenton girl, Miriam Selden, and they have 2 children. And my grandmother goes and joins him. A few months later, in 1947, my mother and father get married, and that was the picture you saw on the cover. A year later, in 1945, they also come to America. They come with the American Joint Distribution Committee. They help my parents come over, and my mother and father move into Uncle Gerhard's house on Edgewood Avenue in Trenton, New Jersey. Life after the war has its own challenges. I especially like the picture on the lower left. It is my mother, Uncle Gerhard, and his wife, Aunt Miriam, and this is New Year's Eve. It's December 1948, December 31st. And what I love about that picture, they are celebrating drinking soda pop. They have gone through terrible times, but here they are celebrating New Year's Eve. And I just think it's a wonderful photo. The picture in the center is my mother and me. I suppose it's around 1953. I was born in 1950, so I'm guessing I'm about 3 years old. It's a lovely picture to me also. My mother looks beautiful, and it's just a nice picture. I grew up first in Trenton, and then in Hamilton Township, and then in Ewing Township. I'm an only child, and I have to say, though, despite not having brothers and sister, my mother did everything with me. We rode bikes to a community swimming pool. She taught me swimming. We did things outside. She was fantastic. My father was my math buddy. My father excelled in math, and through him, I did okay too. And when I graduated high school, I got a scholarship from the post office, was where my father was working. And that picture on the bottom is me holding up the scholarship. Which made me most happy is that scholarship validated his belief in me. And I think that's what made me most happy. Behind my father, you'll see a portrait. That portrait is my grandfather, my father's father. So that came over, and that picture always sat in our living room over the fireplace, a place of honor to remember him. The picture on the far right is my mother and me. It's my graduation from Douglas College. My father is not in that picture. My father has died a few months before that. He died in February of 1972 of a heart attack while shoveling snow. It came fast, it came completely unexpected, and it left me completely brokenhearted. A few weeks actually after graduation, I got married to Lenny Grossman, who went to Rutgers, and Lenny and I met while in college. Soon after we got married, days after we got married, we moved to the Bronx, where Lenny started medical school, Albert Einstein College of Medicine. After his training, we moved back to New Jersey. I started working as a financial analyst. Life was very busy with work and with raising 2 children, Eric and Amy. I'm going to move ahead quite a number of years to actually 1995. This is important because Berlin tries to make amends for all the atrocities, for the Holocaust, which is impossible. They invite people to come back to visit their homeland, their home city. Mom never wanted to go. She didn't want to go back to Germany. Finally, she decided maybe she should. It would be a good opportunity to see Eva Kassira again. So in 1995, which was 50 years after the end of World War II, Mom and I fly over to Berlin. And that first picture is Mom with Eva, and both ladies are exchanging identical long stem red roses. It is a wonderful reunion where they're catching up on 50 years. We have gifts that we've given Eva, And it's hard. Mom gives her a gold bangle bracelet and some scarves. And what do you give a person who has saved your life? There's nothing adequate, but we try to give her something to show our appreciation. The trip to Germany, to Berlin, in addition to being a chance to see Ava and for me to meet Ava, was a chance to walk on the streets and see the places where my parents grew up, and to also, there are many memorials in Berlin to commemorate the Holocaust and to remember the war. The one on the right is the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church. It was badly damaged by the Allies' bombing. It has never been rebuilt. Next to it, there is a new church, but that building remains with its steeple torn as a reminder of the war. There are many other reminders in Berlin. We go to the site of the Grosse Hamburger Strasse, where the deportations were, where Mom's parents were taken before they were deported to the camps. There's a statue right next to there was an old age home where people were brought before they were deported. That statue that is very evocative. I put that in, it's right in the middle. There are 13 people. They are emaciated. There are men, women, and children, and they are looking out into space. They are looking out to the unspeakable evil. The picture on the left is my mother standing next to the memorial stone. That is the stone that they've erected on Grosse Hamburger Strasse at the deportation center. And it says in Berlin, 55,000 people were deported from this place. And the stone basically says to never forget and to regard the peace. No, I'm going to skip this for the sake of time. What was important to me after the war was we leave Berlin, and I very much want to record my parents' story, to remember the people who saved my mom and my dad. This picture, and we succeed on that. This is a picture on when we are honoring Hanna Zucek and her daughter Eva Kasira. And I don't know if you can read their names. The medal appears, there's a picture of it. This is a ceremony where you'll see my mom in the middle. Next to her is Peter Pere, who was a cousin of Eva Kasira. And on either side, the man on the far left represents the Israeli consul in New York. His name is Gil Lanier. The man on the right is Emil Jacobs. He's from the German consulate. And they are there to present this medal and the certificate to Professor Peter Pere in recognition of his family, of what Eva Kasira and Hanna Zucek did for my mother. A very brief story. The way we actually get to meet Peter Pere, I know I'm running on the dates, but I hope this makes sense. 50 years after Kristallnacht, which is 1988, my mother comes to the Jewish Center and gives a speech telling the audience what she saw on Kristallnacht, seeing the synagogues burn, seeing people beaten, seeing people fearing for her brother's life. She tells the audience this story, and she tells them she was saved by Eva Kasira. After the program, Ruth Faith comes up to me and says, Evie, I think there's somebody in Princeton who's a cousin of Eva Kasira. And I look at Ruth, who I know, with disbelief, knowing that my mother's story is important, but I didn't have any connection to Princeton. But indeed, Ruth was completely correct. Peter Pere's mother was Suzanne Kasira. Suzanne's father and Ava's father were brothers. So Suzanne and Ava were first cousins. Peter knew the whole story from his mother and also from his father, who was actually Ava's financial guardian. So when Ruth put us in touch with Peter Pere, she put us in touch with a person who independently knew the whole story of Mom's survival but never knew her name and never knew that she was
Okay.
living in Trenton, just
Very
a few
good.
miles
Thank you
away
so
from
much.
Princeton.
Okay, bye.
Andrea, did you need something? Oh,
No,
okay.
we're good. Thanks.
You're good? Keep going? Okay.
Oh,
And then,
yeah, finish up and then we'll take questions.
okay, so that's the story of my mother's rescue, of the people who saved her. This slide was, we also had to honor my father's rescuer. And if you can see in the middle there, it says Paul and Helena Pisarius. Now, this a whole story. I don't have time for this, but Paul and Helena had both passed away by the time we did the honoring, which was, I think, in 2011. It was a challenge to Werner, was actually Paul Pisario's nephew. Again, they knew one another. Paul had lived, and Werner and Paul had lived together, and after the war, Paul had come back to visit Werner and his wife, and he had told him all about hiding the Jewish family. But again, the names were lost and they couldn't remember, they didn't know what happened to this family. Through many help of different people, I get in touch with Werner Pisarius. He is very happy to accept the award. We fly to Andernach, which is a small town in Western Germany by the Rhine River. I had studied German for years then, so I could give a speech in German. I could speak to Werner Pisarius and give him my thanks in German for rescuing my father and his parents. What I felt sad to know that the actual rescuers had passed away by the time I actually succeeded in honoring them. But the people who received these awards were not strangers, were not distant relatives, were not people who just knew of the story second or third hand. These were people who knew their relatives, who knew their stories firsthand. And I'm very happy that they could accept the award for their family. Both of these people, these recipients, have passed away. Werner was 97 at the time of the award, and Professor Perret has just passed away this past September. I was hoping to have the book finished in time to give it to him because I owe him a big debt of gratitude too for so many things. But he has a son and I've told him about the book. So that giving the award closes a circle in some way of honoring the people who really took incredible risks in hiding both my father and my mother during the worst of times. Thank you for listening.
Beautiful. Thank you, Evie. We can open the chat for questions.
Oh, let me get out of here. 1 second.
Okay.
Okay, I'm out.
Okay, you can, we'll just give it a few minutes and see. People have questions. Okay. Just give it a couple minutes.
Sure.
That was great, Evie. I read the book, but that elucidated a lot of things for me.
Thank you,
Seeing the visual.
Thank you. Right, a lot of this, I mean, all of it's in the book. Many of the pictures are in the book, but some of the documents I added for this talk, some of the original documents that I thought were interesting.
Okay, so we have some questions are coming in. The first one is, thank you for a poignant presentation. I was wondering if your parents spoke often of their devastating experiences during your upbringing.
My mother spoke much more about her experiences both before Hitler came into power, which were actually very positive experiences. At that time, she found living in Berlin wonderful. My father has been gone, it'll be 49 years this February, and truth be told, he didn't speak that much about it. I think the hardest things for my mother was the fact that nobody came back. Her brother never came back. I think she didn't expect her parents to come back, but she was hoping. Her brother was young and he was strong. And there's a whole story of his survival in Auschwitz, which I was able to find and I talk about in the book. I think she was hoping he would return from the camps, and that he never returned, that he didn't make it, I think impacted her very greatly.
And what I remember from the book, that it was never really clear what happened to him,
No,
so that she never had the closure on that.
absolutely, that's correct.
Okay, all right, so wait, there's more questions. Next one, was your mom the only person or refugee in that mansion with the
No,
family?
N- that's a great question. No, it was funny. There was a gardener, Schindler, I think. No, no, not Schindler, Schnitzer. I don't remember his name. Mom said that he was the gardener, and she didn't talk to him much. But when the war was over, he came up to her. He was Jewish also. They never spoke, but they kind of both realized that they were both Jewish, but they kind of just didn't speak. He didn't sleep there. Other people slept in the house. There was a woman who, or many people, because when people lost their houses, the people who had extra space were required to take them in and provide shelter. One of the people who came in was a wonderful woman who actually had a Jewish boyfriend who she couldn't bring, but and who became a good friend of Mom's. But the house served as an incredible place for Nazis, but also for various people. Most could not be trusted. Only a few Mom could confide in, and who knew who she really was.
Okay. Okay, more questions here. Did the rescuers suffer any repercussions for hiding your family members? We know that often happened in Poland.
That is a great question. The Pisariuses, who lived in this little house in an apartment building in Berlin, my father lost contact with him. However, by an incredibly fortunate accident, I made contact with a woman, Walter Schwab, who was a journalist who actually lived in the same building where my father was hiding. It was, I think, a 4-story building, and she lived on the 4th floor. And she wrote a piece on the newspaper, the German paper, Kreuzberg Chronicle, called Die Eisenbahnstrasse, which is the name of the street, the railroad street where they lived. And in that, she talks about Paul Pisarius hiding the whole story of the death of my grandfather. When I first see this article, I'm shocked to read it, dismayed that this secret my father has kept for so many years is out there on the internet. But I soon realized that this journalist actually knew Paul Pisarius, the person who saved my father, and we get in contact and we have a great correspondence. She tells me that the neighbors, Paul Pisarius is an old man at this point and tells everybody what he did. The neighbors don't want to hear it. They do not give him the respect you might hope that they would have given him. They are annoyed with him. They think he's making up the story. They think he's fabricating. They think whatever they think. And it is so when Walter, this journalist, writes me these emails and tells me she wrote this article about him because she liked him and she believed in him, but she wasn't ever sure if it was really a true story. And then when she receives an email from me confirming it, it is a huge shock to her. But she goes on to say that other neighbors would say ridiculous things, that the Jews had the best place in the bunkers when the bombs came, which is a total lie. My father and his family were in that a little apartment when the bombs came. They never could go to the bunkers. They were in more danger than anybody else. So sadly, your answer to that question is they did not receive the recognition. They received a bit from the German government. There was a bit of money given to Leni Pisarius for a while in recognition, but it was not much. And when she passed away, that money stopped, and it was very little and not very much recognition, I'm sad to say.
Okay, have you used any resources such as Ancestry.com to find out whether you had any other relatives in Germany?
That's interesting. I have gone on ancestry.com, and I frequently, when I first did it, I would get people responding to me saying we're second or third cousins. And I would write back and I would give them different names, Jacoby or Joseph. And actually the family's name was originally Lipman. And that's another story. My grandmother's maiden name was Brill. That's my father's mother. My mother's name was Davidson. I would tell them different cities where they lived and saying, do you have any connection there? No. So all the people through that, they turned out to be dead ends, but people have contacted me trying to find out if there were any connections. I do want to add one thing about research. A lot of this information came from the International Tracing Service, which provided a wealth of information, provided information on the deportations, the dates, how many people were on the train. It further provided information on my mother's brother, Hans Martin, his time in Auschwitz. He was in an infirmary there, lots of details, but the International Tracing Service has a wealth of information that is available to people. Sometimes it takes months to get it, but they are a treasure trove of information.
Is that just for the Holocaust survivors, or is that?
I'm not sure, but it's for all it's a European thing. It's not a German thing. I know that. And I'm not, that's a good question. I will check on that. I'm not sure.
No, that would be a
Sure,
wonderful
I'll find out.
resource for many of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and then someone commented that they heard Rabbi Prince in 1963. Dr. King was listening and made the remark that the greatest sin is silence.
Yes.
That was a part of his mission.
Yes.
And that Rabbi Prince impacted her as well.
Yes.
And then there's another question. After the war, my uncle refused to buy anything made in Germany. Did any of your relatives have similar feelings?
That's a comment I've heard very often, and I completely can understand it. I mean, what the Germans did was horrible. What they did was just terrible. And I completely understand not wanting anything to do with Germany. I think for me and for my family, there's a mixed feeling. My parents were saved by good Germans. Granted, there were very few of them. I mean, I'm counting 4, the 2 people who saved my father and the 2 people who saved my mother. That doesn't stand up very well to the Wehrmacht, to the army, to the millions who were killed. It's inconsequential. But in terms of my mother and father, there was a part of them, the German part of them, that's never left them. And there was also part of them. My father would read the Aufbau, which was a German newspaper. There were German songs, there were children's songs that the sound of German, I think, is too often associated, and I understand, with the Hitler's rallies, the Nuremberg rallies with Heil Hitler, with the horrible sound. There is another sound. There is a sound of children singing. There are songs, there are other books, but it's hard to put that against the horrors that Germany inflicted on so many people. So we didn't boycott German things the way many Jews did, but I totally understand that sentiment.
Right. Okay. Any final questions? I think we've gone through them. Okay. Evie, do you want to? Oh, we got to thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your questions.
Yeah.
Thank you
No,
for
it
your
was
interest.
really, really wonderful program. Okay, so do you want to provide your email address if people have? You're getting a lot of thank yous here, a lot of kudos. Someone wants the name of the book again.
The name of the book is Hidden in Berlin, a Holocaust Memoir by Evelyn Grossman. If you go to Amazon and put in Hidden in Berlin, it will come up. It comes up, and it's available in Kindle and paperback and hardback.
We're hearing the book is incredible, fascinating stories. Thank you. Yeah, people clearly enjoyed this.
Thank you.
Okay, so Evie is going to give you her email address. If you have any questions that you think of or any information you want to share, So Evie,
Yes,
take it away.
if there are questions that come up or you wanted to know, it's evgrossman@gmail.com. Just evgrossman@gmail.com. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. I'd be happy to do that. Sure.
Okay. Wonderful program and book. Thanks so much. Love the book. You've got some fans out there, Evie.
Well, I appreciate your coming.
Okay.
Really, it's an amazing story. And as I said, I initially I wanted this for the family, but I'm glad it is. The book, just one more thing, was the first part of it. It's my parents' story. The second part's a little bit more of my voice, but it's an amazing story. My parents lived through the worst of times, and it's a story that I want my family and others to know. And it's an important story. Mom is still with us. I just want to say Mom is now 97. She's not feeling 100%. Do you want to be here or no? Not really? Just for a second?
Well,
Here's Mom. Here's Mom.
today I feel so bad I hardly can talk. So otherwise I would love to talk to you. And the book is so wonderful. I'm so proud of this. And every word is the truth.
And people are saying hi to Mom. And then, and Marcia and Elliot, it's signed by Marcia and Elliot. Dear Evie, thank you so much. Very moving.
Thank you.
So she wanted you to know. Evie, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
Mom has been here. I'm in like our guest room study, whatever. And I had asked Mom, she's just not feeling that well right now. So I didn't want to put her on the spot, but I also wanted her to feel welcome to say something if she wanted to.
Well, I think it's a treat for people to see her. So
Yeah, Mom is
that's great.
97, and you know,
I make it 3 more years when I'm 100.
We're hoping.
Come
We're
to my
hoping.
party.
we will have a big party.
Okay. All right. And you heard from Marcia and Elliot. Did you hear that? Thank you so much. Very moving.
Oh, thank you. Thank
We
you.
have Kol HaKavod to you both. We have thank you, Evelyn and Mom, for sharing this important story.
Thank you. And really, Andrea, thank you for organizing this. I really appreciate having the opportunity to talk about my book.
We're delighted to have you. And of course, one more word from our sponsor. We have drop-in counseling sessions, support sessions for 30 minutes if you need help, but you're not looking for formal therapy. Drop-in hours are Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 10 to noon, Thursday and Tuesday and Thursday, 5 to 7. On Thursdays at 9:30 a.m., we offer a social support group for seniors. This offers an opportunity to connect, socialize, and support each other during this difficult time. Okay, I thank everyone for attending. It was a wonderful program. Thank you, Evie, for putting this together for us. And we're waiting for your second book.
Thank you so much. And thank you.
All right. And there's
JFCF for
one
doing
more
this.
comment here. There are some good people everywhere. Your parents were fortunate to find them in Berlin.
I want to add one more thing, which I say on the back of the book. My parents survived for the morality of the rescuers, and along with a very, very large dose of luck. There was luck that really, and without that luck, things would have been very different. And I say that very honestly, because as much as they were strong, as much as they were resilient, and the rescuers were moral, there's a lot of luck to their survival. Some things you just don't account for. So that's important.
Right. Okay.